and welcome to part 4 of installing Archinux on a VM on a Mac. So now we've reached the networking part. We need to create a networking situation for when we boot up our brand new Arch install. Now I mentioned before that traditionally you used to start it up as a network profile under netctl, which is the network manager that comes in the Arch base install. But the problems with that is it tries to bring it up and it causes a delay in boot, and if it was ever the case that there wasn't a network there, other programs that rely on the internet would start to hang up and it would cause all manner of badness. So there's an improved method of doing that, and that's to use a plugin called ifplugd, which plugs into the systemd unit and means that it detects when there's a connection or a disconnection from an Ethernet cable, and that will just nicely bring up the network or take the network down cleanly so we don't get any of these bad situations. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install that particular plugin, and it's going to be the first time that you use patman, which is the package manager for Arch Linux. So type patman, then -s, which is how we install things. I think of -s as install, and then ifplugd. It'll show you the package. You've just got to press enter, which confirms yes, and it'll install the package for you. Then what we need to do is we need to enable that package so that when we do actually start the machine up, it's going to run this plugin up and it's going to be monitoring. And with systemd we use systemctl enable, and then we put netctl hyphen the plugin name ifplugd at, then the name of the interface, which here is enp0s3. Now you don't always have to put this because it will auto-complete or attempt to, but to be on the safe side, it's a service that we're trying to set up here. So we put .service on the end, and that'll create us a symlink like that. Now the next thing we need to do is create a profile so that when you actually do detect that there's an Ethernet cable there, it loads a specific network profile. Now as it happens, they do provide some examples in the netctl folder. There's an examples folder, and we're going to use one that's called Ethernet DHCP, and we're going to copy it to the netctl folder like so. There you go. So that's now made a copy of it, and I'm going to show you a little handy shortcut here in Bash. I'm going to do VI, and then we're going to do exclamation mark and $, which basically says we want to take the last parameter passed to the previous command, which in this case was etc netctl, and then I'm just going to type Ethernet DHCP because that's what I want to append to the end of it, and that's now editing the file. Using the arrow keys, let's get ourselves to the E and do a capital C for change. So this is going to let us overwrite what's currently there, and we're going to set the interface name, which is enp0s3. Press escape, :X to save and exit. Before I do, you'll notice there it says DHCP. This is going to automatically go and get you an IP address from the router. I have skipped a bit, I realise, which I'm sorry, and I'm just going to show it you. If you're wondering how do you find out what the interface name is, just type IP space A for address space S for show, and this will show us our basic IP addresses, but it also happens to show us the name of the interface. In this case it's number 2 ENP0S3, and you'll see it's up at the moment and it has an IP address which has been done by DHCP by the boot the live disk, if you like. So now we know what the network is and we've created a default profile for it. That should now automatically bring up our network when we boot our live system. The last step in this whole process is here. You'll be glad to know we're that close, so close to booting our system for the first time. To be able to boot our system, we'll need two things. We're going to need to be able to install a bootloader, which is going to actually allow us to go and load the Linux kernel, and we're also going to need to make sure we set a password for the root user so that we can actually log into it once it has booted up. Setting the root user password is really easy. We're going to type passwd, press enter, and put in your root password. Last you put it in twice. Done. So that's your root password. Remember it. That's what you're going to need to log in with when you first boot up the machine. Final step. Yes, that's right. The final step is to install a boot manager, and the boot manager that most Linux installations nowadays use is called grub. So we're going to have to install grub. So back into Pacman again, minus capital S, and we want grub. Do you want to install it? Yes, I do. Press enter. This is now going to install the grub package for me. Okay. Now we need to tell it to install the bootloader part. Now you remember I mentioned the master boot record earlier on in the previous video. When the BIOS initially starts up in the computer, it goes to the first part of the disk and looks for the master boot record. So we need to put something in there to say basically run grub for us. And the way we do that is we type grub install, because we want to install grub. The target in this case is going to be an i386PC, -PC. Okay, PC, not V. So just to cap there, grub install, what we're basically doing here is we're saying we want to install grub into the target, which is an i386PC. Basically, the method we're using with the old-fashioned BIOS was originally designed in the early PC days, and it's what all Windows and DOS and everything else used to use. And the architecture of the machines were called i386s. So it still kept the name the i386PC format, which basically means putting it in the master boot record at the start of the drive. Now you'll notice there that failed because I've missed out a very important feature, and that is the fact that you need to tell it where you want to install it. Now as you saw there, it's not going to do any harm, it's just going to spin around and say, I'm sorry, I have no idea what you want to do. You need to tell it where you want to install. So we're going to say dev SDA. We don't need to specify a partition because we're just telling it at the start of that drive we want to put our master boot record. So hopefully that now explains exactly what this command's going to do when we run it. Now it says installing for i386 PC platform. Install finished, no errors reported. Please be careful if you're doing this on a machine that may have other things installed on it. Please make sure that you specify the correct drive, because if you specify the wrong drive, you're going to overwrite whatever boot sector's already there. And if that happens to be a Windows installation or such like, it's not going to boot anymore. So in this example, you've watched us create the drives. Do make sure you do put the correct drive letter in there. It's not the end of the world if you don't, because you can recover it. But in this easy, lightweight tutorial course, if you like, or whatever, we don't want to get in a mess like that. So we're doing it in a virtual machine. As long as you're doing it and you're not, I mean, you can do these things that I'm showing you not in a virtual machine, but obviously be aware that you could break it. So just be doubly sure that you check everything to make sure you're using the right drive letters when you're doing this process. Okay, and now we're coming to the final stages. Now we've installed grub into the boot sector at the start of the disk. We now need to create a configuration for it so that it actually knows where the kernel is and how to load it. And that's been made simple thanks to the grub team. All we need to do is type grub make config -o for output, and then we're going to tell it to write us a configuration file to boot grub.cfg. And that's basically going to have a look. It's going to look in the boot folder, see what kernel we've got in there, and then it's going to create us a bootloader configuration from that and stick it into the boot grub config file. Press enter. It goes off and finds the configuration there. You can see it's found VM Linux, which is actually the kernel itself, and the initial RAM file system, which it'll also load that image up when it boots up. So we are now ready to reboot the machine and see if we've been successful in creating our base Arch machine. So a few things we need to do first. We need to log out of the chroot, so Control and D will log you out. Then we just need to make sure that we unmount the drives that we just mounted. Now don't make the mistake of typing unmount. You might do until you get used to it, but it's actually just U and then the word mount. -R will recursively unmount. So I'm going to do that, and what it basically means, oops, make sure you put a space in there. What I'm going to do here is I've told it, please unmount mount and anything underneath it. So if you remember, we mounted the boot folder as well. So this just saves me having to unmount them both separately. Press enter, that's unmounted those. Now it's time for us to reboot the system. Be ready to hit F12 on your relevant computer so that we can get into the boot menu so it doesn't boot the CD up, and we can try our install. Are you ready? Here we go. Press enter. There it goes into the boot menu. Choose one for hard disk. This is now the grub bootloader we've just installed. Press enter. As you can see there, it's loading up our kernel. There you go, it's checking our root disk to make sure it's fine, and there is our Arch Linux login. And just to check that everything is all good, we type root and the password that you just set earlier on, and there you are, you're logged in to your Arch Linux based system. At this point, congratulations, you've just installed an Arch system. This can now go anywhere you like. So the video is going to end here because we could span out into lots of different places at this point. And I might do yet, depending on if there's any interest. But certainly we're going to go down the desktop route. At this point, you have a basic Arch Linux install, and from here you can either turn it into a server, or you could go off and create a desktop, or whatever you like. So there you go. Until next time, take it easy, and I'll see you again soon.